Easter Sunday, 2025. I stepped into my parents' house in Portland, Oregon, the air thick with the scent of ham and spring blossoms. Family gatherings always carried a familiar chaos, laughter, clinking glasses, and my brother Liam's voice rising above it all. But that day, something shifted deep inside me. For years, I'd braced myself for his dismissive jabs, his subtle ways of dimming my light. This time, I felt a crack in the silence I'd held so tightly. I wasn't just Emily, the little sister anymore. I was ready for the truth to break free. My brother Liam, 38, was always the tech genius in our family. From building computers at 13 to launching his AI startup, he wore his brilliance like a crown. For years, he dismissed my career with lines like, "Not everyone can handle a real career in tech." I swallowed the hurt, hiding my own success. That Easter, he bragged again, spinning tales of his startup's triumph, oblivious to the truth I carried. Then Grandma Eleanor, sharp as ever, spoke up, and the room fell silent. In that moment, everything changed, and Liam's world began to unravel. This is the story of how I stopped hiding my success and faced my family's truth. For too long, I let Liam's shadow loom over me, his words convincing everyone, even me at times, that my achievements didn't measure up. But I'd built a career in tech, not by coding, but by mastering systems, strategy, and vision. When I discovered his failing startup on my acquisition list, I held the power to rewrite our story. This isn't just about revenge, it's about reclaiming my voice and proving that success doesn't need to shout to be real. If you've ever felt overshadowed by a sibling, a friend, or anyone who made you feel small, this story is for you. It's for anyone who's stayed quiet to keep the peace but knows deep down that truth is worth the fight. Stick around to see how one Easter dinner turned years of rivalry into something unexpected. Drop in the comments, have you ever had to stand up to someone close to you? Where are you watching from? Let's share our stories and remind each other, your light deserves to shine, no matter who tries to dim it. Growing up in Portland, Oregon, in the 1990s, my brother Liam was the golden child, the one everyone watched with awe. At 13, he built his first computer from a jumble of wires and circuit boards, his fingers moving with a confidence I envied. I was 10, messing around with friendship bracelets and a clunky solar panel model I'd pieced together for a school project. I'd spend hours in our garage, tweaking the panels to catch just a bit more sunlight, dreaming of making something that mattered. When I won the school science fair in 5th grade, I ran home, clutching my blue ribbon, my heart bursting with pride. I showed it to Liam, expecting maybe a nod, a smile, anything to share in my joy. Instead, he glanced at it, smirked, and said, "Cute, Emily, but it's pretty basic compared to my coding trophies." That moment stung, a sharp jab that lodged deep. It wasn't just his words, it was the way he said them, like my work could never measure up to his. That set the tone for our childhood, a pattern where Liam's brilliance cast a long shadow, and I was always scrambling to find my place in it. Our house buzzed with his achievements, robotics club medals, programming competition certificates, all displayed proudly on the living room mantel. My ribbon? It ended up in a drawer. Liam's talent was undeniable, but so was his need to remind everyone of it. I'd sit at the dinner table, listening to him explain algorithms to our parents, his voice loud, commanding. I wanted to be seen too, but every time I tried to share something, my latest science project, a speech I'd written for class, Liam would interrupt, steering the conversation back to his world. It wasn't malicious, not exactly. It was just Liam being Liam, certain that his path was the only one that mattered. And in our family, that certainty shaped everything, leaving me to wonder if my own dreams, my own strengths, could ever shine as brightly as his. I'll never forget the summer of 2000, the day I showed Liam my solar-powered toy car. I was 10, and I'd spent weeks in our garage, gluing wires, testing batteries, and praying the tiny motor would hum to life. When it finally rolled across the driveway, powered by nothing but sunlight, I felt like I'd conquered the world. My hands shook with excitement as I carried it to Liam, who was hunched over his latest computer project, a tangle of code on his screen. "Look, Liam," I said, holding up the car like it was a trophy. "I made it work." He barely looked up, his eyes scanning the car for maybe 3 seconds before he smirked. "That's not real tech, Emily," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "It's just a toy. My coding's changing how computers talk to each other." I stood there, frozen, the pride draining out of me like air from a punctured balloon. I mumbled something and ran to my room, tears streaming down my face. The car sat abandoned on my desk for weeks after that. I couldn't look at it without feeling small, insignificant. That's when Grandma Eleanor found me. She was in her 70s then, a former math professor with a mind sharper than anyone I knew. She'd taught at a time when women in her field were rare, and she carried a quiet strength that made you listen. She sat on my bed, her silver hair catching the light, and asked what was wrong. I spilled it all, Liam's words, the way they made me feel like my work didn't matter. She listened, her eyes steady, and then she said something I've carried ever since. "You see systems, Emily, how things connect, how they work together. That's your gift, and it's just as powerful as any code your brother writes." Her words were a lifeline, pulling me out of the hurt. She told me about her own days in a male-dominated field, how she'd had to fight to be seen, to prove her worth. "Your brother's talent is one kind of brilliance," she said, "but yours is another. You understand people, processes, the bigger picture. Don't let anyone make you think that's less." I clung to those words, replaying them when Liam's dismissal stung. Grandma Eleanor saw me in a way no one else did, and she gave me permission to believe in myself. That moment didn't erase the shadow, but it planted a seed, one that would grow, slowly, as I learned to value my own path, even if Liam couldn't see it yet. Our parents, David and Susan, were captivated by Liam's tech skills, and I couldn't blame them entirely. Dad, an accountant who wrestled with basic spreadsheets, looked at Liam like he was unraveling the mysteries of the universe. Mom, a high school English teacher, would nod along to his jargon-filled rants about processors and algorithms, her eyes bright with pride, even when she didn't understand a word. Liam had a way of filling the room, his confidence magnetic, his achievements tangible, trophies, certificates, a partial scholarship to MIT for computer science. My successes, though, always seemed to fade into the background. I excelled in business classes, led the debate team, organized school events, but those felt like soft skills, less impressive in our family's eyes. When I got into the University of Washington's business program, Liam snorted, "Business isn't real STEM, Emily." Dad chuckled, like it was a harmless jab, and Mom said, "Liam, be nice," but then asked him about his latest coding project. I swallowed the hurt, forcing a smile, but inside, I felt like I was shouting into a void. Their pride in me was real, I knew that, but it was always quieter, overshadowed by Liam's brilliance. I'd bring home a report card with straight A's, and Dad would say, "That's great, honey," before turning to Liam to ask about his robotics competition. Mom would hug me, but her questions were always about school, never about my dreams, my vision for the future. Liam's world of code and circuits was exotic, untouchable. My knack for strategy, for understanding how businesses worked, seemed ordinary by comparison. I started to internalize it, questioning if my strengths were enough. Every family dinner became a stage for Liam's monologues, his voice drowning out mine. I'd try to share something, a marketing project I'd led, a leadership award, but he'd cut in with a story about his latest hackathon win, and the conversation would shift. I'd sit there, picking at my food, feeling like an afterthought. Yet, deep down, I knew I had something to offer. Grandma Eleanor's words echoed in my mind. My ability to see systems, to connect ideas and people, was a strength, even if it didn't come with trophies. But living in Liam's shadow meant learning to be quiet, to dim my light so his could shine brighter. It was a habit I carried for years, one that would take a seismic shift, like that Easter dinner in 2025, to finally break. In 2012, I graduated with honors from the University of Washington's business program, my cap and gown a symbol of years of hard work. I was 22, brimming with ideas about how business could shape technology's future. But when I shared the news at a family dinner, Liam, my older brother, just smirked. "Business? That's not real STEM, Emily," he said, his voice carrying that familiar edge of superiority. The words cut, but I brushed them off, determined to prove myself. I landed a marketing job at Synergy Tech, a rising star in enterprise software. It wasn't glamorous, writing pitches, analyzing customer data, but I loved the challenge. I wanted to understand the tech we sold, not just sell it. So, I enrolled in night classes, learning the basics of coding, not to become a developer, but to speak the language of the engineers I worked with. I'd stay up past midnight, wrestling with Python scripts, my laptop screen glowing in the dark. By 30, I'd climbed to marketing director, then to business development, each promotion a quiet victory I rarely shared. At 35, I became director of strategic acquisitions, leading a team of 15, shaping tech markets by identifying companies with potential. My job was to see the big picture, market trends, competitive edges, future growth, and I was good at it. Really good. But at family gatherings, I kept it quiet. Why? Because every time I mentioned a milestone, Liam would nod absently, then launch into a story about his latest coding breakthrough. My parents, David and Susan, would listen, enthralled, while I sat there, my achievements fading into the background. I didn't want to compete for their attention, it felt futile. So, I built my career in silence, pouring my energy into work, letting my results speak where my voice didn't. I negotiated deals that brought millions to Synergy Tech, bridged gaps between technical teams and corporate goals, and earned respect from colleagues who saw what I could do. Yet, in my family's eyes, I was still just Emily, the little sister who did marketing stuff. It wasn't that they didn't care, they did, but Liam's brilliance was a spotlight, and I'd learned to live in its shadow. Grandma Eleanor was the exception. She'd catch my eye across the dinner table, her knowing smile saying, "You're more than they see." Her belief kept me going, even when I doubted myself. I wasn't chasing Liam's approval anymore. I was building something real, something mine, and I knew one day, the truth would speak louder than his words. While I was carving my path at Synergy Tech, Liam was busy building his own legend. At 38, he'd launched NextGen, an AI startup he called the future of technology. He had a knack for making everything sound revolutionary, and at family dinners, he wielded that talent like a weapon. He'd lean back in his chair, tossing out terms like neural networks and blockchain architecture, his voice drowning out the clink of silverware. Mom and Dad, David and Susan, would hang on every word, their eyes shining with pride. Dad, an accountant who still fumbled with his smartphone, treated Liam like a tech prophet. Mom, a high school English teacher, nodded along, even when his jargon sailed over her head. I'd try to share my own news, a promotion to team lead, a deal I'd closed, but Liam would interrupt, his voice booming. "That's nice, Emily, but let me tell you about our latest funding round." And just like that, the conversation shifted, leaving my words hanging in the air. It wasn't just the interruptions, it was the way he framed my work as trivial. "Marketing's not the real stuff," he'd say, waving a hand, as if my career was just window dressing for his kind of genius. I'd bite my tongue, swallowing the urge to argue, to tell them I was leading multimillion-dollar acquisitions. Why bother? Liam's stories were louder, flashier, and my parents lapped them up. I'd sit there, picking at my plate, feeling like a guest at my own family's table. But Grandma Eleanor saw through it. At 80, she was sharper than most, her iPad always close by, her mind a steel trap. She'd catch my eye across the table, her wink a silent promise, "Your time's coming, Emily." Those winks were my anchor, a reminder that someone saw me, even when I felt invisible. Liam's startup was his stage, and he played the lead with gusto. He'd talk about investors, tech blogs, his vision to disrupt the industry, while I stayed quiet, my own successes locked away. I didn't need their applause, I told myself. My work spoke for itself at Synergy Tech, where my team respected me, where my decisions shaped the company's future. But deep down, I wanted my family to see it too, not just Liam's version of success, but mine. Every dinner, every holiday, I held my tongue, waiting for the moment when the truth would demand to be heard. Grandma's winks told me it was coming, and I held on to that hope, even as Liam's shadow grew longer. In early 2025, everything changed. I was sitting in my office at Synergy Tech, the Portland skyline gray through the window, when a report landed on my desk. The name on it stopped me cold: NextGen. Liam's company. My brother's pride and joy, the startup he'd boasted about for years, was on my acquisition list. I stared at the pages, my heart pounding. They had brilliant technology, an innovative approach to machine learning that could enhance our platform, but the numbers told a different story. NextGen was bleeding cash, with no revenue, no strategy, and a burn rate that screamed disaster. They were months from collapse. I froze, the weight of it sinking in. Liam, the self-proclaimed tech genius, had no idea I held his company's fate in my hands. I leaned back in my chair, memories flooding back. Last summer, at a family barbecue, Liam had cornered me by the grill, a beer in his hand, and said, "Marketing's just fluff, Emily. Real tech is what drives the world." I'd smiled tightly, saying nothing, but his words had festered. Now, pacing my office, I felt a surge of something new, not anger, but clarity. He's about to learn how wrong he was, I thought, my steps quickening. I'd spent years building my career, mastering the business side of tech, while Liam dismissed it as trivial. Yet here I was, director of strategic acquisitions, with the power to decide NextGen's future. The irony was almost too much. I remembered the late nights studying market trends, the deals I'd closed, the respect I'd earned from colleagues. My team trusted me to see what others missed, to spot potential where others saw risk. And NextGen? It was a classic case: brilliant tech, terrible execution. Liam's engineers were talented, but his business model was a house of cards. I could have recused myself, it was the ethical thing to do, given the conflict of interest, but curiosity pulled me in. I dug deeper, reading reports, analyzing their financials. The truth was stark: without Synergy Tech's intervention, NextGen would fold, taking Liam's dreams with it. I thought of Grandma Eleanor's words from years ago: "You see systems, Emily, how things connect." This was my gift in action, seeing the bigger picture, knowing how to save what Liam couldn't. But it wasn't just about saving his company. It was personal. For years, I'd stayed silent, letting Liam's ego dominate, letting my family believe his narrative. Now, I held the truth, and it was heavier than I'd expected. I paced faster, my mind racing. Should I tell him? Warn him? Or let the acquisition play out, let him face the reality of his failure? I thought of that barbecue again, his smug grin as he called my work fluff. I thought of every dinner where I'd bitten my tongue, every moment I'd dimmed my light to keep the peace. The truth was clawing its way out, and I knew it wouldn't stay quiet much longer. Easter was a week away, and Liam would be there, bragging as always. But this time, I wasn't just the little sister in his shadow. I was the one with the power, the one who'd seen what he couldn't. As I stopped pacing, staring at the report, I felt a shift inside me. This wasn't about revenge, not really. It was about truth, about claiming my place, about showing my family who I really was. Grandma Eleanor had always known. Her winks, her quiet faith, had carried me here. Now, it was my turn to speak. Easter Sunday, 2025. My parents' dining room in Portland, Oregon, was warm, familiar, bathed in the soft glow of the chandelier. The table groaned under Mom's spread, honey-glazed ham, scalloped potatoes, yeast rolls that took hours to rise. Crystal glasses caught the light, and the good china, a wedding gift from my grandparents, gleamed. But beneath the comfort, tension simmered. Liam, my brother, held court at the center of the table, his voice rising above the clink of silverware. At 38, he was in his element, boasting about his strategic exit with NextGen, his AI startup. He leaned back, gesturing with his wine glass, spinning a tale of triumph as if he'd orchestrated a masterstroke. "You have to know when to cash out," he said, his eyes glinting with self-assuredness. Then he turned to me, a smirk playing on his lips, and said, "Not everyone can handle a real career in tech, right, Emily?" The words landed like a slap, sharp and deliberate. Ryan, my boyfriend of 2 years, sat beside me, his grip tightening on his fork, his knuckles paling. I cut into my ham, the knife steady in my hand, but my stomach churned, a storm of years-old hurt and fresh anger swirling inside. I kept my face calm, my breathing even, but every fiber of me screamed to respond. For decades, I'd let Liam's jabs slide, his dismissals of my career piling up like stones in my chest. Marketing, business, strategy, he'd called them fluff, unworthy of his world of code and innovation. And now, here he was, rewriting his startup's failure as a victory, oblivious to the truth I carried. My company, Synergy Tech, had acquired his sinking ship. I knew the real story, NextGen's bleeding cash, its unsustainable model, but Liam didn't know I knew. He didn't know I was director of strategic acquisitions, that I'd flagged his company as a target. As he droned on, I glanced around the table. Mom, Susan, smiled tightly, her eyes darting between us, sensing the undercurrent. Dad, David, nodded at Liam's every word, proud but clueless. My aunt and uncle murmured agreement, caught in his spell. Only Grandma Eleanor, 80 and sharp as a tack, sat quietly, her water glass in hand, her eyes locked on me. Her silence felt like a signal, a quiet urging to break mine. I took a slow sip of wine, steadying myself. Liam's voice grew louder, his arrogance filling the room, but I felt something shift inside me, a crack in the wall I'd built to keep the peace. This wasn't just another dinner. This was the moment the truth demanded to be heard. Then Grandma Eleanor, 80 and sharper than ever, set down her water glass with a deliberate clink. The room didn't notice at first. Liam was mid-sentence, waxing poetic about his startup's game-changing tech. But her voice, clear and steady, cut through like a blade. "Is that why Emily's company bought yours, Liam?" she asked, her tone calm but piercing. The table froze. Forks paused mid-air, eyes widened, and a heavy silence swallowed the room. Liam's face flushed a deep red, his confident smirk vanishing. He stared at Grandma, then at me, his mouth opening, closing, searching for words. "She's in marketing," he snapped, his voice cracking with disbelief. "What are you talking about?" All eyes turned to me, and I felt the weight of years, decades, of silence pressing down. My heart pounded, but I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "Actually," I said, my voice quieter than I felt, "I'm Director of Strategic Acquisitions at Synergy Tech. I've been in that role for 2 years. And yes, I identified NextGen as an acquisition target." The words hung in the air, heavy with truth. Liam's eyes widened, a mix of shock and betrayal flashing across his face. "That's impossible," he stammered, his hands gripping the table. "You would have said something. My team dealt with Synergy's executives, not you." I kept my gaze steady, refusing to shrink. "Your team dealt with my team," I corrected. "I recused myself from direct negotiations because you're my brother." "But I was involved, Liam. I saw the numbers. I know NextGen was failing. The room was deathly quiet now, the kind of silence that makes your ears ring. Mom's hand covered her mouth, Dad's fork clattered against his plate, and my aunt whispered, "What?" to my uncle. Heather, Liam's wife, stared at her plate, her face pale. She'd known, I realized, but hadn't told him. Ryan's hand found mine under the table, a silent anchor. Liam's face cycled through emotions, disbelief, anger, panic. "You're lying," he said, his voice rising. "You're trying to take credit for my exit. This is sabotage." He pushed back his chair, the legs scraping harshly against the hardwood floor, and stormed toward the door. "Liam, wait." Mom called, but he didn't stop. The front door slammed, the sound echoing like a gunshot. I sat there, my hands trembling in my lap, the truth finally spoken after years of holding it in. Grandma Eleanor reached for her water again, her eyes meeting mine with a flicker of pride. "Truth matters, Emily," she'd told me days before, when I'd called her, anxious about this dinner. "Peace built on lies isn't peace." I'd wanted to keep the peace, to let Liam's narrative stand, to avoid this exact moment. But now, with the table in stunned silence, I felt something else, relief, raw and overwhelming. I'd spent my life dimming my light so Liam's could shine, but no more. The truth was out, and it wasn't just about NextGen. It was about me, about claiming my place, about refusing to be the little sister in his shadow. I looked at Grandma, her knowing nod steadying me. The confrontation wasn't over. Liam's exit left a wound that needed tending, but for the first time, I wasn't afraid of what came next. I'd spoken my truth, and it was louder than his boasts. The room waited, breathless, for what I'd say next, but I knew the real conversation was outside, with Liam, where years of rivalry and misunderstanding demanded to be faced. I found Liam on the front porch, slumped on the steps, staring at the quiet Portland street. The April air was cool, carrying the scent of blooming trees, but the tension between us was thick. He didn't look up as I sat beside him, leaving a careful distance. For a moment, neither of us spoke, the silence heavy with everything unsaid. Then, in a voice raw and breaking, he asked, "Was NextGen really failing?" The vulnerability caught me off guard. Liam, the tech genius, the golden child, sounded small, almost lost. I nodded, my throat tight. "Your tech was brilliant, Liam, but the business wasn't. No revenue, unsustainable costs, it was months from bankruptcy." My hands shook as I spoke. I'd never confronted him like this, never stripped away his carefully crafted image. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar from our childhood, and stared at the ground. "I thought we just needed more time," he said, barely above a whisper. Another round of funding, another milestone. I softened, seeing the pain he'd hidden behind his bravado. "That's common with startups," I said. "Most fail for the same reasons. But your tech? It was worth saving. That's why Synergy Tech stepped in." He finally looked at me, his eyes searching mine. "You really did this? You saved my company?" I shook my head. "I didn't save it for you, Liam. It was a business decision. But yes, I saw its potential." He let out a bitter laugh, not at me, but at himself. "I've been an ass, haven't I?" The blunt admission startled me, and I couldn't help a small smile. "Yeah, you really have." For the first time in years, we were honest, no posturing, no competition, just two siblings facing the truth. "I never asked about your career," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "I just assumed, marketing, you know. Not real tech." I nodded, the old hurt surfacing. "You never asked, Liam. You were too busy telling everyone why your work mattered more." He winced, and I saw something new in him, self-awareness, maybe even shame. "I'm sorry, Emily," he said, and the words felt genuine, a crack in the wall between us. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of years begin to lift. "Thank you," I said simply. We sat in silence again, but this time, it wasn't hostile. It was fragile, like the first step towards something new. "What happens now?" he asked, glancing at me. "With NextGen, with us?" I looked out at the street, the neighbor's dog trotting by. "That's up to both of us," I said. "But maybe we start by being honest." He nodded, and for the first time, I saw my brother, not the rival, but the person beneath. The porch was just a beginning, a place where truth could finally breathe. The dining room fell silent after Liam stormed out, the echo of the slammed door lingering like a held breath. The table, once vibrant with Easter's warmth, honey-glazed ham, crystal glasses catching the chandelier's glow, felt heavy with shock. My dad, David, broke the stillness, his voice soft, almost hesitant. "Brianna, sorry, Emily, we had no idea." The slip of my old name, a childhood echo, hit me unexpectedly, but his eyes, wide with regret, grounded me. Heather, Liam's wife, spoke up, her voice trembling. "I saw Emily's name on the paperwork for the acquisition. I thought Liam knew." Her admission hung in the air, a quiet confirmation of the truth I'd just laid bare. I took a deep breath, steadying myself against the weight of their stares, Mom, Dad, my aunt, my uncle, all waiting for me to fill the silence. NextGen's tech was valuable, I explained, my voice calm but firm, but it was failing. No revenue, unsustainable costs, it was months from collapse. Synergy Tech's acquisition saved it, saved the jobs, the intellectual property. It wasn't personal, it was business. Mom's eyes teared up, her hand reaching for mine across the table. "We're so proud, sweetheart," she said, her voice breaking. "We should have known more about what you do." The words, simple but sincere, cracked something open in me, a longing I'd buried for years, to be seen, not as Liam's little sister, but as Emily, a leader in my own right. My aunt leaned forward, her voice gentle. "Why didn't you tell us, honey? You're so high up at Synergy Tech." I paused, the question stirring old wounds. "I guess no one really asked," I said softly. Liam's achievements were always louder. Dad winced, guilt etching his face. "We should have noticed, Emily. I should have noticed." Grandma Eleanor, who'd sparked this upheaval with her sharp question, sipped her water, her eyes twinkling with quiet pride. She'd told me days before, truth rebuilds stronger foundations. Now, as the family absorbed my role, Director of Strategic Acquisitions, not just marketing stuff, I felt that foundation shift. Ryan, my boyfriend, squeezed my hand under the table, his steady presence a reminder I wasn't alone. Heather spoke again, her voice raw. "The acquisition saved us, Emily. Liam wouldn't admit it, but we were drowning, savings gone, a second mortgage. It was a miracle." Her honesty stunned me, I hadn't known how dire their situation was. The table grew quiet again, but this time, it wasn't awkward. It was a space for truth to settle, for years of misunderstanding to begin unraveling. Mom wiped her eyes, Dad nodded slowly, and I felt a weight lift, not fully, but enough to breathe. The confrontation had broken the old patterns, and now, we were starting to rebuild, one honest word at a time. 3 months after that Easter dinner, Liam walked through the glass doors of Synergy Tech as a technical advisor, a role he'd accepted after weeks of wrestling with his pride. The man who'd once called my work fluff was now part of my world, navigating the corporate landscape I'd mastered. It wasn't easy for him. Liam, the startup founder, the self-proclaimed genius, had to adjust to reporting to Marcus, a manager who valued collaboration over ego. At first, he bristled at the structure, the layers of approval, the team dynamics so different from his one-man show at NextGen. But he was learning, and I saw glimpses of a new Liam, one willing to listen. He started asking me questions, small ones at first, about project management, then bigger ones, about market strategy, customer retention. One Tuesday, over lunch in the company cafeteria, he leaned forward, his coffee cup between his hands, and said, "How do you handle teams who don't agree on priorities?" I blinked, surprised, then answered, sharing a framework I'd honed over years. He nodded, jotting notes on his phone, and I felt a quiet thrill, not triumph, but connection. Another day, he stopped by my office, his tie loosened, his usual swagger softened. "I'm not the star anymore, Emily," he said, a half-smile on his face. We laughed, the sound light but real, a moment of progress that felt like a bridge between us. It wasn't perfect, Liam still slipped into his old bluntness, ruffling feathers in meetings, but he'd catch himself, apologize, try again. He was learning business skills, the very things he'd dismissed as trivial, and I saw pride in his eyes when he nailed a presentation or solved a team conflict. At Synergy Tech, his technical brilliance found a new purpose, integrated into our enterprise platform, and he thrived in ways his startup never allowed. I was learning too, how to assert my expertise without resentment, how to guide without gloating. Our weekly lunches became a ritual, a space to swap ideas, not compete. We'd talk about next-gen's tech, how to optimize it, but also about life, his stress, my goals, the family we both wanted to mend. Grandma Eleanor had been right, truth didn't destroy us, it gave us a chance to grow. Liam's apology on the porch that Easter night had been the start, but these months showed me he meant it. He was trying to see me, not as his little sister, but as a colleague, a leader, maybe even a teacher. And I was starting to see him, not as the rival who'd overshadowed me, but as my brother, flawed but capable of change. Together, we were rewriting our story, one honest conversation at a time. Last week, Liam and I sat at Grandma Eleanor's cozy apartment for dinner, her famous pot roast filling the air with warmth. For the first time in years, we swapped stories about work like equals, me sharing a tricky acquisition deal, Liam explaining a breakthrough in his team's algorithm. Mom and Dad, Susan and David, watched from across the table, their faces a mix of amazement and quiet joy. Dad, usually so quick to praise Liam's tech feats, turned to me mid-conversation. "Emily, I'm learning to celebrate you both equally," he said, his voice earnest. The words landed softly, a balm for years of feeling secondary. Mom nodded, her eyes bright. "We're so proud of you both," she said, and this time, the pride felt shared, not divided. It wasn't perfect, old habits lingered, and I caught Mom asking Liam about coding before circling back to my work, but it was honest, a work in progress. Grandma Eleanor, 80 and ever the orchestrator, smiled from her armchair, her eyes twinkling. She'd been waiting for this, she later told me, for the day her grandchildren would stand side by side, not in competition, but in collaboration. As we cleared the table, Liam nudged me, joking about a Synergy Tech meeting where I'd sounded like a corporate robot. I laughed, firing back about his tendency to over-explain algorithms. Mom overheard, chuckling, and Dad joined in, the room alive with a new kind of ease. Grandma's smile said it all, she'd known this was possible, even when we didn't. Our family was changing, learning to see us both, to value my business acumen as much as Liam's technical skill. It wasn't the end of our story, but a beginning, one where honesty replaced pretense, where we could all shine without dimming each other. That night, as Liam and I left Grandma's, I felt lighter than I had in years. The truth we'd faced at Easter hadn't broken us, it had rebuilt us, stronger, truer, together. That Easter Sunday in 2025 changed everything for me. Standing in my parents' dining room, facing Liam's arrogance and my family's misconceptions, I learned a truth that reshaped my life: silence isn't peace, it's suppression. For years, I'd dimmed my light, letting Liam's shadow define me, believing that keeping quiet would maintain harmony. But harmony built on lies is fragile, and that night, I broke free. Speaking my truth, revealing my role as Director of Strategic Acquisitions, exposing NextGen's failure, wasn't easy. My voice shook, my heart raced, but the freedom that followed was worth every moment of fear. If you've ever felt overshadowed, whether by a sibling, a colleague, or someone whose voice drowned out yours, hear this: your achievements matter. Your voice matters. You don't need to shout to be heard, you just need to speak, unapologetically, and claim the space you've earned. That Easter, I didn't just confront Liam, I reclaimed myself, and in doing so, I opened the door to a new relationship with him, one built on honesty, not rivalry. Grandma Eleanor's wisdom guided me there, her belief in my ability to see systems, to connect, reminding me that my strengths were as vital as any code. This story isn't about revenge, it's about truth, about the courage to stand tall when others try to make you small. I want to hear your stories. Have you ever had to stand up to family, to prove your worth against their doubts? Share below, because every story matters, every voice deserves to be heard. Hit like if this resonated with you, if you've ever felt the weight of silence and longed to break it. Subscribe for more stories about finding your place in tech, in family, in life, stories of resilience, of truth, of shining your light no matter who tries to dim it. Let's build a community where we lift each other up, where we celebrate every victory, big or small. Your journey, like mine, is worth sharing. So, comment now, what's one moment you stood in your truth? Where are you watching from? Together, we can remind the world, no shadow is too big to step out from.